Unless you have some crazy good memory, you've probably typed something similar to that into Google in the last couple of days. And when I type something in like that, I kind of feel stupid and kind of wonder how I can ever call myself a programmer. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit more common than you might think. And because of that, I want to start a series called Code with Me, which is basically going to drop you into what I'm doing. And rather than showing you all of the code that I'm writing, so, what parameter am I passing to this specific function, those kind of things, I want to give you that 10,000 foot view and take you through how I'm thinking about the problems that I'm thinking about, kind of the workflow behind it, how long it took me to solve the problem and implement what I'm trying to do, all those kind of details. And hopefully that will just give you a better sense of what coding is really like. I know that when I first started, I think that this would have been really helpful to just see, so I'm going to try this concept out. Be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you like the concept, and even leave some comments below as to kind of what you thought of the video.
In today's video, we're going to be talking about JavaScript dates. And the reason is because someone emailed me the other day and said, hey, I've got a problem with the golf training application that I maintain. And what their problem was is when they entered their like a new golf round for tracking their golf statistics, the date that they entered the round as was showing up as the previous day. And so initially I was like, oh, no big problem, I'll figure this out in just a few minutes and get this updated. What I didn't know was this was going to take me down a couple different routes before I ended up with the solution. So I'll show you the training application that I maintain here. And this is something that I built pretty recently, so there's still some bugs to be worked out for sure. Now, this is the new round entry, and this is where they will enter their golf rounds. And so let's just enter a new fake round where it's September 30th is the round date. And so we'll go with all the defaults here. And so you'll notice that in the stats summary, it's showing September 30th, 2020. And then when I click create round, it's going to say the round date is September 29th. And if we went to my rounds, you'll also see that this round that we just created was played on September 29th. So this is a problem. And the way that I first started thinking about this was, oh, what if this person is in a completely different time zone? Like, what if they are across the world coming from or using this app from Australia? Well, my server is in the US, and so I was thinking, okay, well, there might be something to do with that. And so I emailed them, and they responded back, and they said, no, I'm in the US. And so I went back to the drawing board thinking, well, what the heck? I don't understand what could be going on, because my server is somewhere, I think, in New Jersey or something, and I think that person was maybe in Colorado. So at most, we have like a 2-hour time zone difference, and so that would not cause this to be an entire day off. So the first thing I did was go to Google, and I found this post on Stack Overflow about the JavaScript date being off by 1. But basically this selected answer was talking about UTC time and how there's date offsets for different time zones. And so I was thinking, well, it's probably a time zone issue, but I still couldn't understand, how could this be an entire day off? Like, why isn't it just a couple hours off, which would result in the same day? So I was just trying to figure this out, and so then what I realized was that this is only a problem on the production server. So if you see this app here, this is my live version of the app. And if I were to pull this up in my local version, so if we went to VS Code, this is where I'm running the app from, you can see that my server and my front end are running. And if I open up localhost 4200 and go to new round, and we'll put the same thing in. But this time, as you see, we actually have the correct date rendering here. And if we create the round, go to My Rounds, you'll see that the date is correct. So there's obviously something going on between the production server and my local server. And so that kind of got me thinking, well, what is different about the two? Like, why would they be that different? So after I kind of thought that maybe this had something to do with production versus localhost, I just typed that into Google and I found this Stack Overflow answer, which is basically talking about this very problem. And in the first answer, which you can see this is not a very common question, as there's 0 upvotes on the accepted answer, I read this and it shows that these functions return values based on the local time zone of the computer where the code is running. Now, some say, well, you probably should have known that already, but fact of the matter is, I may have known this, but I wasn't thinking about it, and I certainly did not have this at the top of my mind. So this kind of gave me the clue of like, okay, here is probably the difference between my local host and the production server. And so then the next step in this process was, well, how do you figure out what the local time zone is on your computer? And so all I did was I went to VS Code, or actually first I went to Google and I said how to find time zone on Ubuntu, because that's what my server is running. And you can see in the Google suggested results, it says the time zone info is saved in etc time zone. So I just went back to my VS Code here, and just in the terminal, I printed the contents of etc time zone. And you can see that this is America, New York, or Eastern Standard Time. And then if I went to my actual server, let me drag this over real quick. This is the server that the app is running on. I've SSH'd into it. And if I cat that same thing out, you'll see that the time zone is UTC. And so that basically was how I figured out what was going on here. And clearly the server that I'm running my app on is UTC time, which is enough to be a day off from the Eastern time that my local development environment is running off of. So the question now becomes, well, how do you actually fix this? So before I get too far into this video, I want to say that after the fact, after I had actually implemented this entire Angular component and spent 3 hours or so, I found a simpler solution. And I thought about leaving this detail out, but I thought, true to this video, I want to make sure and share everything that happened along the way. And this is something that happened and something that has happened to me many times before, where I'll go on and waste a couple hours or even a couple days and realize that the solution was much simpler if only I had understood the concept that I was dealing with. And as a side note, I actually created a guide on how JavaScript dates work because through this process I realized that I didn't quite understand it as well as I thought that I did. You can check that out in the description below. So in this case, that is what happened, but I lucked out, and because the way that my app is built, I'm going to eventually need to ask the user for their time zone. While it didn't solve the specific problem that we're talking about in this video, it did kind of help me build out that component that I was going to have to do eventually anyways. And while we're here, I guess I could say if you've enjoyed this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more like it. Alright, we'll get back to the original programming here. So let's see what Google has to say. Should I ask users for time zone? And this is where, as someone like me who never kind of received formal training, I don't know these things, and so I have to look them up. And I'm going to just go on Stack Overflow, and I think I read this before. This is the answer that I kind of came on when I was first researching this, And this guy says, well, the most popular or standard way of determining a user's time zone is to just ask them. Ask them in the app, and if they care enough about this time zone, they'll put it in. And so that's one answer. And then the other answer, as you can see, I think maybe the official accepted answer, or the most upvoted one, is saying you can use the get time zone offset function on a date to actually calculate the user's time zone on the front end. So there's really two approaches here. We can either ask the user for their time zone, or we can try to calculate it on our own. And so I was thinking, well, what if we did both? So what if we not only displayed the time zone that we think the user is in, and then we allow the user to change that if they determine that what we've guessed for their time zone is actually not right. And that could happen in the case where maybe they're running a VPN and they're not actually showing the correct location on their computer in their browser, and so we wouldn't be able to actually predict their time zone correctly. So I was kind of thinking about this, and if we go back to the app, I'll go ahead and close out the production app. But if we go to the local host version of the app and we go to new round, I was thinking that an easy way to do this is to basically, like, right below this input field, I can put a little piece of text that says something like, we've calculated your time zone is X. And then it will say something like, it'll have like a button that says change your time zone or set your time zone. And then basically what I was planning on doing is setting that user's time zone on their user profile in the database, and then every time we load the app, we can automatically assume that their time zone is going to be what they've saved in their profile. But if they have not saved a time zone in their profile, we're going to try to actually guess their time zone in the app. And so the way that I usually do these kind of things is just start sketching it out in a notebook. This one's pretty simple. I'm just going to be adding a little piece of text, but in some cases it's a little bit more complicated where we're working with more visual elements. And so just a quick little sketch will help me kind of think about this, but more importantly, since we're working with Angular, I want to make this component kind of reusable. I want to be able to drop this little line of text in here into multiple places within my app so that the user has multiple opportunities to check and make sure that their time zone that is displaying on the screen matches what they're actually in. And if it doesn't, they're able to click something like, no, this is not correct, and they can change their time zone all within that little Angular component. So I want to make this reusable, and luckily I use Narwhal is, I guess, the company, NX client, or the NX workspace, which is a tool or framework for developing monorepos. And so if we go into my code, you'll see that the file structure that we have here is built into apps, which is going to, training is going to be the app that I'm using, that we're looking at. But we also have the libs, which allows us to break out all sorts of different components and Angular classes and stuff like that into modular pieces of code. And so this really helps us separate stuff out. And so if I go to shared, and then I go to Angular, I've already set up a lot of this, but if I go to shared Angular components, and then go into this area of the application, you'll see that I've already got a few shared components. And this is where I'm going to actually place this new little time zone calculator. So at this point, for the sake of saving some time and not making this video completely unwatchable, I'm going to go ahead and make this component and maybe stop a few times along the way to explain a few things that might be helpful to you. So what I first am doing here is creating a Narwhal NX component. You can see I kind of messed it up at first, had to basically remember what I was doing, go back to some old examples. Now I'm kind of creating this new separated Angular component, checking that it works here. That's the first step. Always make sure your component works. And then you start to actually develop it out. So got some CSS going, styling the component first. I always like to do that right up front. And then now I'm editing the backend. So the backend models, I need to add a time zone property to my user model. And so once I've done that, I'll actually come back to the component and start scaffolding out the different methods that I'll need. And in this case, I'm making a component that's going to be entirely separate and isolated. So I'll be using inputs and outputs, which are a super powerful component of, or piece of the Angular framework. So you see, I kind of forgot how the outputs worked. So I was Googling that. And my output is when the time zone changes. So when the user selects a different time zone, it'll make an output event to the host component. You can kind of see how this works. I slowed it down here. The user can change their time zone, and then that will actually load in their user profile. And so the second thing that I had to do was actually go to the user profile and update that, because at the current moment, or before I did this, I didn't have a section for like general settings. So I'm making like a general settings piece here and allowing the user to basically change their time zone from their profile if they wish. So once I did that, I'm kind of just doing some last minute checks here to make sure that this works. And after I've made sure it worked, I'm committing it to my repo, and then now I'm on my server. This is a little bit manual. I forgot to npm install because I added moment time zone. Once I've installed it, I'm making a build, and then I'm deploying it. So just doing some last checks. You can see I have a staging site so that I can check to make sure things are working before I actually push it to the production. And that's what I'm doing here. At this point, I think we'll wrap it up at that. In all, I implemented a small little lightweight component, or Angular component, that I can now slot into various portions of my app in the future to update the user's preferred time zone for displaying dates. And not only that, but it's going to predict what the user's time zone is, so they don't even have to set it if they don't want to. So it kind of leaves it up to the user to decide, is this important to me? Is the guess that, is this app guessing the wrong time zone? If so, do I want to change it? And so it kind of just gives the user some options there. In all, this change took me about 2.5, almost 3 hours in total to do. And you might say like, oh, all you did was add a little tiny time zone component there. But, with an app of the size that I have, which is, I would say, probably a small to medium size app, you still have a lot of pieces that this touches. Like as you saw, we went through and we built the front-end Angular component, kind of built that out, and then connected that up with the database, had to change some of the models in the database, had to update a few other components that were displaying the dates wrong. So you can see how it touches a lot of different parts of the application. I always try to spend the time to think about, like, how can I future-proof this solution, and how can I make sure that this bug does not come up again, and if it does, I can quickly change it. Now, of course, you didn't see at all, during this video, you didn't see me write any unit test, which is not good. But at this point, I actually don't have all my unit tests set up, and even with the server that I'm pushing to, I previously had some continuous integration and deployment where all I'd have to do is push my changes from the local repository, and then a bunch of tests would run and basically deploy it without me doing anything. As you can see, as you saw, I had to do this manually. I had to manually pull down the changes to my staging and production servers. and test it manually to make sure that my change went through. So not ideal. This is not where this app will eventually be, but had a deadline to hit. As many who have worked on a deadline know, it's not always going to be perfect. So working to get that a little bit more automated, but for now it's a little bit of a manual deployment process. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and kind of the concept behind it. If it helped you out, if you enjoyed watching it, give it a like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications for future videos just like this. And until next time, I will see you later.